The goal of our client here is to have his knee go past his toes as far as possible while having his foot, his knee, and his hips aligned. From this angle, you can see that everything is aligned. However, his resting foot is pointing inwards. I do notice that the client's left ankle is slightly lifting off the ground. Similar with the previous test, the client's foot, knees, and hips are aligned. However, his resting foot is pointing inwards. From this angle, you can clearly see that the client is having his foot pointing towards the midline of the body. The client's arms seem to be pushing against the wall, which means that he is not fully relaxed. We can see that the resting leg is slightly lifted off the ground. Although the left hip flexion has a greater mobility, the right resting leg also lifted higher in return. From this angle, we can clearly see that there is no excessive curvature in the client's back. The client is exhibiting a significantly greater range in hip flexion while doing the passive test. We do notice that client's resting leg lifted higher off the ground during passive tests. Not to mention, the professional is also doing a good job of making sure the stick is being held up perpendicularly against the floor. Because we can see that the client's shoulders are not tensed up, we can say that the shoulders are relaxed. Client's spine is also neutral because his shoulders are forming a straight horizontal line. From here, we can see that the client's head is bended forward, which makes the shoulders and ears not aligned. The shoulder and ear alignment can be seen more easily through sagittal view. For the Y balance reaching test, the client is using his hands to help maintain balance. It is important to note that our client rested his right arm on its right thigh at the very end of this test. As to conclude, our client has a better stability and active mobility on his left extremities and a better passive mobility on his right extremities.
Our client had an apparent difference in his range of motion when comparing his passive results to his active results. In the hip flexion test, we found that our client had a greater range of motion during the passive test because he had assistance from the band, helping increase his overall range of motion. This was proven because during the active test, the client had a score of 2, but in the passive test, he scored a 3 because the band helped him, resulting in his lateral malleolus getting past his mid-thigh. We believe that this occurred because in the passive test, coordination and strength are not factors that influence the client since he had assistance from the band. During the Y balance test, we noticed that the client's mobility did influence his overall results. In the active hip flexion test, the client was slightly more mobile in his left hip compared to his right. We determined this because his lateral malleolus went past his left resting knee, but only went to an equal distance on the right. We then compared these results to his active dorsiflexion results. His right ankle had more mobility in the active dorsiflexion test, which could be a main cause for his Y balance results, specifically when he was standing on his left leg, pushing with his right leg anteriorly. Since the client had more mobility in his hip, he was able to have a 12 centimeter greater push anteriorly. This can also be the cause for his posterior lateral push being 36 centimeters greater on the left side. Since his left joint is more mobile, the greater distance can be covered. We believe that hockey player Frederick Anderson can greatly benefit from each of the tests performed to increase his overall performance on the ice. Frederick is a goalie, so great hip range of motion is key. The more mobile his hips are, the greater his ability to make saves will be. We're able to test his hip mobility and stability using the hip flexion test and the Y balance test. The ankle dorsiflexion test will also be beneficial because skates restrict ankle movement. Healthy ankle range of motion is pivotal because it can affect his whole chain in terms of range of motion. The shoulder flexion test is not quite as critical, but can be beneficial. It can give an indication if his range of motion is great enough to make saves where he might need to reach out and extend further. All these assessments can help Frederick make the necessary adjustments to improve his overall range of motion.